Hi, Jan Karel.
Hello, Anand. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fine.
It's great to have you here today.
It's great to be a participant in this setup of yours.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So today my guest is Jan Karel Lenstra. He's CWI Fellow and former General Director of CWI, the National Research Institute for Mathematics and Computer Science in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. His research interests are in combinatorial optimization, in particular scheduling, routing, complexity, and approximation. He was co-editor of 15 books, including The Traveling Salesman Problem, History of Mathematical Programming, and Local Search in Combinatorial Optimization. He has been chair of the Mathematical Optimization Society and of the Royal Dutch Mathematical Society. He has also been chair of committees on mathematics in primary education and on informatics in secondary education of the Royal Netherlands Academy for Arts and Sciences and of the Spinoza and Stevin Prize committees of the Dutch Science Council. He served as editor-in-chief of Mathematics of OR and OR Letters. Jan Karel, such an honor to have you here. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation.
Let's go ahead.
Okay, so let's start. When and where were you born?
I was born on December 1947 in Zaandam, which is a city just north of Amsterdam.
I know you have a big family. Let's start learning a bit about your parents.
Okay, well, my dad was born in Groningen, which is up north, in 1910. And he studied math, but he was a slow student. He was distracted by teaching, by chess, by everything. But when the war started in 1940, he finished his master's fast, and he moved to The Hague. He had a side interest in psychology, and he took a job at what they called a psychotechnical firm, where it was a firm that invented the IQ for the Netherlands. And he was in charge of selecting personnel for the Dutch railways. So, and my mom, she was younger, she was born in 21. Her dad, so my maternal grandfather, he was a smart guy. And in high school, his teachers advised him to study either theology or mathematics. And he went for theology, and he eventually became a professor of Semitic languages and the Old Testament in Utrecht. And my mom was studying law, and then in 1942, he suddenly died at a pretty early age, and she had to interrupt her studies. She became secretary at the same psychotechnical firm, and my parents met. So they married, and in 1946, my dad became a high school teacher in mathematics in Zaandam, where I was born. And in 1951, we moved to Friesland, to Drachten, where he became rector of a high school. And in 1955, he could return back to his city, Groningen, to become director of a bigger high school, which was a nice job. However, he became deaf, which was an obstacle for him. So in 1964, he became associate professor at the University of Amsterdam. You know, the baby boom generation, people like me, born after the war, this generation was arriving in those years at the universities, and there were lots of openings for people teaching at university. So he became one of those. And we moved to Amsterdam, and he had the hope to become the managerial director of the Math Institute, which, however, didn't work out. He became disappointed. For him, the move to Amsterdam was not a good one. He retired early. However, for me and my siblings, the six of us, this was a big and positive thing. Our world opened up. You know, in Zaandam, Drachten and Groningen, it was a time of the post-war reconstruction, and really a reconstruction of the pre-war world. A world with small margin, strict norms. If you live in Groningen, you think that Groningen is the capital of the world. But if you live in Amsterdam, then you know that Amsterdam is the real capital of the world, right? And then in 1964, that was also the time that the baby boom generation took charge, and it was the end of peace and quiet. It was the time of the student revolts, and in Groningen everyone was pro-monarchy. In Amsterdam everyone is revolutionary, anti-monarchy. So that was quite a change, and it was very good for us.
So your parents certainly had a very busy life. Not only, prior to the war, during the war, after the war, and also they had so many kids. So could you briefly speak about your siblings?
Yeah, well, I'm number 2 out of 6, and I was, of course, closest to number 1 and 3, Andries and Hendrik, and I discovered quickly that they were much better in math than me, and math was important at home, I can tell you. And I can tell this was a blessing of my life. I've been surrounded throughout all of my life by people that were smarter than me. First by those 2 guys, then by Dick Karp and Gene Lawler, then by Eva Tardos and David Shmoys. And that's very good for your taste and your judgment, that you are held to higher norms. So that was good. And 4 of the 6 of us went into math or computer science. One brother went into virology. In fact, he claims that he was the first person that discovered that the coronavirus has small legs, which is why it's called corona. And my sister went into social studies, and she doesn't have a university degree, but she established a hospice for people that are dying. And of the 6 of us, she was the first one that received a royal decoration, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah. So the Lenstras are quite known around there, right?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, one thing you should know, in the 50s, there was a soccer player by the name of Abe Lenstra. He was a midfield player. He was in the national team, strange person. But until the 70s or the 80s, people would ask, "Are you a relative of Abe?" And then we would say, "Yeah, he was my father-in-law or whatever." But that changed. In the 90s, they would say, "Lenstra, are you one of those mathematicians?" So in that sense, science won over sports, which suits us well, I think.
Yes. So when compared to your siblings, do you think you have played more like a leading role or a supportive role?
Well, I thought about this, and in fact both, because with smarter people around me, I tend to support and to assist. I was doing the shopping for my mom, and I packed the luggage. Packing luggage is an optimization problem. I'm pretty good at it. And later I got into organizational and editorial jobs, editorial so that other people could write the papers, managerial so that other people could do research. But those editorial and organizational roles put you into a leading position, right? And I can tell you, I wrote many surveys, and writing a good survey, which is more than the sum of its parts, is also a packing problem. So this role suits me well, I think.
You mentioned that you lived in several cities before finally settling in Amsterdam, right?
Yeah, well, we lived in Zaandam, Drachten, which was a village, Groningen, then Amsterdam. Then after I married in 73, I spent some years in Hilversum, got back. Then I moved south to Eindhoven. We spent a year in Atlanta. And we finally settled in Utrecht, which is in the middle of the country, which is very good because all meetings in Holland are taking place in Utrecht.
Yeah, so
and Utrecht is a kind of a small-scale Amsterdam.
Yes. You traveled quite a lot. Do you have any recollections, at least from your early years in those
Yes,
cities?
I do. I left Zaandam when I was barely 3 years old, but I have many recollections from the period. Yeah. And by the way, I visited this house the day before yesterday with my youngest daughter to show her. It still exists. Wow. A small house below a dike. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And did you have good education?
I think in general, yes. I went to primary school, the 2nd grade. I skipped 1st grade in Drachten. That was pretty awful. This teacher had the habit of ranking the pupils according to math ability. So he would put 2 people in front of the class and then say something like, how much is 85 plus 27? And the one who answered first was the winner, and after Euler n square contest, he had the ranking, and that was written on the blackboard, two rows. And the first row was headed smart, and the second row was headed stupid. And that is really one of my worst experiences in life. I mean, I was in the left row and I was pretty high up. I felt extremely sorry. Then I went to primary school in Groningen, which was okay, and I went to high school, a gymnasium in Groningen, which I must say was very good, except for my math teachers. My both math teachers were decidedly awful in Groningen.
Uh-huh. And how was the experience of growing up in the Netherlands just after the end of the war?
Well, until the mid-60s, so until we moved to Amsterdam, this was the period of rebuilding the country after the war. And that was a lot of community feeling, people working for the same purpose. At the same time, there was a heavy social control. The margins were small, the norms were strict. I said this finished when we moved to Amsterdam, and then the world changed and the atmosphere changed a lot. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Before moving to Amsterdam, in 1962, you discovered your passion for typography. How did this happen?
Yeah. Oh, well, I saw an ad in a Groningen newspaper, an ad for a type specimen of what is called Lettergieterij Tetterode, which means Amsterdam Type Foundry, which was one of the two big type foundries in Holland. And I asked my dad to transfer 5 guilders and 90 cents by bank to this firm, and then this cardboard envelope arrived, and I opened it and I got it. You know, it's this book, and it was filled with fonts, and I opened it and I read through it, and I decided this is printed just for me, and then I discovered that I had kind of typography in my soul, and this has been a lifelong interest of mine, the shape of the printed letter and also the history of printing. I can tell you a nice anecdote here.
Sure.
We are taught in school in Holland that printing has been invented by Laurens Janszoon Koster, and there's a story that on a Christmas Eve in 1440 his assistant by the name of Johannes Gutenberg stole everything and took it with him to Mainz. Now, my oldest daughter, Katrien, she's working in the City Hall in a nice office, and she has a big view of the Haarlem marketplace with a big statue of Koster. And in the 19th century, we had in Haarlem big Koster festivities to celebrate the invention of printing. Now, the guy never existed, you know. It is a legend which was invented in the late 15th, 16th century to reinforce our national identity in our struggle for freedom against the Spanish. And he didn't exist, but Koster is a symbol of our Dutch tradition in printing and publishing. So that's the best way to view it. I'm not sure if people are still taught this legend at school, but anyhow, he never existed.
Uh-huh. You have a lot of books, right, on the topic?
Yes, yeah, I think 2,500 or so. Yeah.
Are you kidding me? More than 2,000 books on typography?
By the way, there is a colleague of mine in Montreal, Luc Devois, who has lots of knowledge about typography. Yeah.
And what do you think about LaTeX fonts?
Oh, well, LaTeX is a fantastic system. The font, Computer Modern, is awful. It was made by Don Knuth because he wanted to imitate the font in which his books were published. And this is a late 19th century font, and the late 19th century is the dark Middle Ages of typography. There are much better fonts available, and these are now also available under LaTeX, so that is all past history.
Did you have any interest in reading other than typography and music back then?
Yeah, of course. The world was small in the 50s and 60s, and we read a lot, and we got piano lessons, and we didn't go to soccer or whatever. There was no sports. Now I don't have a talent for piano playing. I can tell you, I can read the notes, and my specialty in music performance is turning the pages. I could write a book about everything that happens to the page turner, which is pretty interesting in itself. After I retired, I bought a cello, but I discovered soon that I don't have a talent for cello playing either. So I restrict myself to listening.
You moved to Amsterdam in 1964, and in the following year there was a revolution, correct?
Yeah, I already mentioned this, that the baby boom generation came to university. They had finished high school. They started to think. They started to think about the society. They became independent. There was a student revolt also in Paris. We got the Beatles making new sorts of music. So that was the end of the pre-war culture. Right, yes.
Yeah. And why did you decide to study econometrics and not mathematics?
Well, I mean, that was a natural choice. I was not the math talent, but the organizational talent of the family. And then econometrics is a natural choice. But then after my bachelor, I went into optimization, and I discovered soon that in optimization, there's little need for economics. And I really should have learned more number theory and geometry, more real math. So in retrospect, I should have chosen mathematics. And if I look at the average mathematician around me, then I could have done it, irrespective of my brothers. Anyhow, that's life. I survived, right?
Yeah, it worked out, of course, really well for you.
Yeah.
And it took only 2 years for you to complete your bachelor's degree in 1967. Did you have any contact with war up to that point, or only in your master's?
Well, my bachelor was 65 till 67, and that consisted only of basic economics and basic math, without any motivation from econometrics or OR, which I think was a bad setup. And that is one of the reasons I finished it quickly, to get to the real topics quickly after my bachelor. Right.
So in your master's is when you had the contact with linear programming and other things?
Yeah, in 67 I started my master's studies, and then you get empirical econometrics, math economics, but also OR. At that time in Amsterdam, with a heavy emphasis on Markov decision processes. Also linear programming, a bit of integer programming, and also computer science. And well, there's a nice story there. I followed a computer science class with Adriaan van Wijngaarden, who is the architect of Dutch computer science. And he said, well, this week I'll give an introduction, but next week you need to know Algol 60. And here's a syllabus written by Dijkstra, and you better read it. So I read the syllabus in 2 evenings in my student room. And I can tell you, this was such a fantastic expository piece of work that after those 2 evenings, I was a good programmer. And this just testifies to the qualities of Dijkstra. This syllabus contained everything.
Wow.
And then halfway my master's period, I became a student assistant at the Mathematical Center, which is now CWI. And perhaps I should say that the Mathematical Center is not part of the university. It's part of the Dutch Science Council, and it was established in 1946 as an instrument to help in the post-war reconstruction of the country, because the universities were all in shambles. So at the Math Center, it was quickly discovered that mathematics was not only the language of nature, but also the language of all of society. It was at the Math Center, people invented computer science, numerical mathematics, statistics, and OR for the new applications of mathematics. And that was a great place to be.
Right. And what was your master's research about?
That was essentially a pretty simple piece of work. It was called Branch and Bound Algorithms for the Traveling Salesman Problem. And I programmed and tested Little, Murty, Sweeney, and Karel. And I also programmed Held and Karp, which just came out in 1970, which was a big improvement. Well, we rate those things in Holland on a scale of 1 to 10, and I got a 9 for my master thesis from my OR professor, but Van Wijngaarden gave me a 10 for the programs because they were well constructed, and I could program in LL60.
Yeah,
but there was not anything really original in them, other than that the programs were written very well, I should say.
Yeah, but that's still very remarkable. Did you discover branch and bound by yourself, or you had classes on the topic?
The teacher of our, Gijs de Leven, who became a thesis advisor, had one class where each of the students had to present a paper, and he gave me Little, Murty, Sweeney, and Karel. So that's what I presented. One interesting thing about Little, Murty, Sweeney, and Karel is that this is the paper that coined the term branch and bound, although the concept exists earlier. But they emphasize branching. They have a bound which is weaker than the linear assignment bound, and they went for branching. While later, branch and bound turned into bound, and try to avoid branching. Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. You finished your master's in 1971 after 4 years. So what came after your master's?
Okay, well, I didn't have a PhD, but as life was in those days, I got tenure at the Mass Center. My professor said, you can stay, and that was it. So I had to do some consulting and teaching, linear programming and Markov decision processes and some IP at firms, because at the firms they didn't have people that were graduated in those topics that hardly existed. And I started to read a lot in things that were accessible to me in routing and scheduling with, I should say, little direction. I was just reading everything that was to hand. And in '72, I came across a paper, McCormick, Schweitzer, and White, which was called Clustering a Data Array. And that was the problem was given a matrix with non-negative entries, permute rows and columns, so as to bring the bigger elements together. And they had a heuristic, and they say this can be formulated as a quadratic assignment problem. And I read it and I saw, yes, that is correct, but it's even a traveling salesman problem. You solve a TSP on the rows and on the columns, and then you were done. And that was my first paper. It was less than 1 page, a technical note in operations research in 1974. And that is something that has been line through my life. I think I like to see relations between problems. This clustering problem was a special case of a TSP.
Yeah. I have a very similar interest as well, and it's quite satisfying when you can see a problem that is originally from routing, but then it can be reformulated, or it can be a particular or general case of a problem like in scheduling and things like that. So I think it's very nice too.
Yeah.
Jan Karel, a series of events happened in the 1970s that certainly made your academic life very busy and vibrant. It all started when someone very special walked into your office in 1973.
Yes, that was Alexander Rinnooy Kan. He had studied mathematics in Leiden, and after that he decided he was pure mathematics was not for him. And that was because he listened to a seminar by Hendrik, my younger brother, and he said, well, that's a real mathematician. So then he studied econometrics in Amsterdam. He went to this guy, Gijs de Leven, and I said, I want to do a PhD with you. And Gijs said, okay, walk to Jan Karel Lenstra and see what you can do together. Now, this was February 16, 1973. I can tell you that last year, on February 16, 2023, we celebrated that we met half a century before by going to the opera, he and his wife and me and my oldest daughter. But Alex was different. Alex had ambitions. He was ambitious, he had a sense of purpose, and we were really complementary. Alex had a global view, and he saw the long lines, he saw the horizon, and I'm the person for details, right? I pack the suitcase. I'm the micromanager, and we implicitly decided to profit from each other's strong points, and not to get irritated by our weak points, and that worked out pretty well. We decided to get onto the theory of deterministic machine scheduling with the classification scheme for scheduling and queuing developed by Conway Maxwell Miller as our organizing principle. Right.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice that you have this friendship, and when you're friends, we try to overlook each other's faults, and you know. The year later, someone famous from Canada visited you in Amsterdam and showed you a very important 1972 paper that you were still not aware at the time, right?
That's correct. That was Michael Florian. His area was transportation research at the Université de Montréal, the Centre de Recherche sur les Transports. But in the lunch breaks, he was working on scheduling with his colleagues as a kind of pastime. So that was why he was visiting Amsterdam in May 74. And he said, if you are interested in relations between problems, then you might be interested in this paper by Karp, Reducibility among Combinatorial Problems, 1972. Now, that was computational complexity, and that went into my brain as God's word into an elder. I mean, that became our second organizing principle, making the distinction between easy and hard. Why is a two-machine flow shop easy? And why do you have to fiddle around in clumsy ways to do anything with the three-machine flow shop? And that was precisely what I needed. I am good at classification, and it turned out I was good at NP completeness proof, because that's about relations between problems, right? If you see the job shop and you see that the partition problem is hidden in there, then you have an NP completeness proof. So there we went.
So that kind of opened the Pandora's box for you.
Yes, that we were really lucky to be around. The scheduling theory was a hodgepodge of isolated results. Combinatorial optimization hardly existed as an area, and there we had our sense of purpose to organize the field, and we got this tool to classify those problems. So we were pretty lucky.
Yeah. In that same year, 1973, you attended a NATO school in Versailles, which can be considered the first meeting where people in combinatorial optimization got together in Europe, right?
It was called Combinatorial Programming by Bernard Roy, the organizer. It was great. I met Nicos Christofides, Egon Balázs, Jack Edmonds, Fred Glover, Darwin Klingman, Peter Hammer, but also, and perhaps most importantly, Gene Lawler from Berkeley. Complexity really didn't exist yet at this meeting. Gene was not even allowed to lecture about it. But Alex and I, and also number 3, Ben Lageweg, a colleague from the Mass Center, we knew about complexity, and that forged a bond with Lawler. And Lawler saw that we were interested in this area, and we planned to write a book on scheduling after our thesis got completed. There's an interesting thing. Gene is the algorithmic person, and I'm the NP completeness person. And it often happens that a problem which is easy when the parameter is equal to 2 is hard when the parameter is equal to 3. And he would talk about the mystical power of 2ness, and I would talk about the magical power of 3ness. Yeah,
that's nice. Yeah. Is it true that he gave a sort of an illegal talk?
Yeah. He gave an illicit talk on complexity in the evening hours when no one was watching, for a small group of interested people. Yeah.
Wow. In 1975, you attended yet another interesting event. This time in Bonn, in Germany.
Yeah, that was organized by Bernard Korte in Bonn. It was paid for by IBM, and IBM insisted on having 60 D-Mark bottles of wine at the conference dinner, which was very good wine. And there we met Bernard Korte and Dick Karp. Dick Karp came there, Martin Greutsel, Vatje Quattal, Lawrence Woolsey. And I think that Versailles and Bonn were the meetings that established combinatorial optimization as a new discipline. But afterwards, Dick, Karp, and Jean traveled with us to Amsterdam, and there, the four of us, Ben Lageweg and Dick and Jean and me, we played a game. We took the easy scheduling problem, and then by throwing a die, we would generate, using this classification, a Heidel problem. And then at one point, you can't do it in polynomial time anymore. You get an open problem, and we tried to prove those to be NP-hard. And we had a class of 4,000 or 5,000 problems, and in those 2 days that we played this game, we kicked off a lot of open cases, and eventually we made a complete listing of all those problems as a present for Alex at the defense of his PhD thesis. And this became the MSP class system, which was later maintained by Broeker and Knoest in Osnabrück, and now by Christophe Dur in Paris. It's an automatic complexity classification where the essential results are represented by the maximal easy problems and the minimum hard ones, right? That was a lot of fun, yes. Generating random change in problem space. Yeah,
that's incredible. It's a wonderful story, and also creating very relevant material for generations. So,
I gave lectures about this, and I would give an introductory lecture when I was visiting whatever Gainesville or whatever, and then I would play this game and see where we got. And it was very enjoyable for the audience, I should say. Yeah.
Wow, very entertaining for sure. It seems that you had a great time in North America in 1976.
Yeah, that was in February 76, just after Alex defended his PhD thesis and just before I did. There was this scheduling special interest meeting of ORSA in Orlando, organized by Don Radcliffe. And that was a clash of cultures between OR and computer science. Marshall Fisher was talking about Lagrangian lower bounds for a problem, but Garey and Johnson were talking about upper bounds for bin packing and analyzing the performance guarantees of their heuristics. And there was a colleague of mine, an OR guy in scheduling, who said, my purpose is to solve the three-machine flow shop as a concatenation of special cases. And then David Johnson would get up and explain that the problem is NP-hard, so that his attempts would not meet with success. And that was the first time that we met Garey and Johnson, which was a lot of fun. They were very nice people, very stimulating.
Right. You have a story with Nicos Christofides as well, right? In another conference later that year.
Oh yeah, that is later. We after my thesis was defended, we spent 2 months with Michael Florian in Montreal, March and April 76, writing papers, visiting Toronto and Ithaca and Pittsburgh. Well, in Pittsburgh, there was a meeting called Algorithms Complexity, organized by Joe Traub, where Descartes presented his probabilistic analysis for the TSP, and Nicos Christofides, who was spending a sabbatical at CMU with Egon Ballas, presented his 3/2 algorithm for the TSP. And I read it, and I saw Nicos and said, "Congratulations, Nicos, it's trivial." And he smiled broadly. He said, "Yes, it's trivial. You know, Dick Karp told me that he saw the algorithm, but he didn't see the half." And that is... So that was nice, but then Nicos came back to Imperial College in London after his sabbatical was over, and his boss told him that Nicos, at Imperial College we do practical operational research, British style, and we do no useless mathematics. And that's the reason that this algorithm never got published in the journal, because his boss didn't like this kind of stuff. So Nicos went ahead developing lots of useless math for vehicle routing and later for financial engineering, which was extremely fruitful, I should say. So the most useful thing you can do is to put your people doing useless math. That's what the lesson you can get from this story.
Both Alexander and you finally completed your PhD in 1976, as you mentioned. In your case, what ended up being the main contributions from your doctoral dissertation?
Alex's thesis was a survey of scheduling. My thesis was a compilation of everything I knew. classification and complexity, branch amount for routing and scheduling, a number of practical applications. It all got published. I think the real contribution was the power of complexity to bring order in the chaos. Garey and Johnson, Garey once said, you know, we should view ourselves as priests. We know how complexity works. Most people still don't. So we show how those tools can be applied. It brings order in the chaos. And yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel that you were sort of a pioneer in the field, looking back?
I mean, Cook and Karp, they were pioneers. They developed the real things. We were lucky to stumble across their tools and be able to apply them to virgin territory.
But at least in scheduling, you were one of the trailblazers, the driving force that pushed this connection between complexity and scheduling.
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky. The world was ready for it, and we got the tools. And what's now happening in scheduling is for some part way above my head. But the Graham survey still gets cited because it establishes the architecture of the field, right? So yeah.
You got tenured at CWI immediately in 1976 after finishing your PhD, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And now continuing with your saga, you had an interesting experience in a summer school in Italy in 1977, right?
Yeah, well, I should first tell you that in early 77, probably in January, Peter Hammer visited us in Holland, and he invited Alex and me for DO77, which was another NATO summer school in Vancouver in August. And he invited us to do a complexity survey and a scheduling survey, but he wanted the stuff being written down beforehand. So we have been working the first half of 77 to write those surveys. And I remembered there was this summer school in Urbino at Sogesta, an institute organized by Christofides, Mingozzi and Paolo Todd in June 77. In the Italian mountains with Italian food, good lectures, and at the same time I was working my head off to compile this survey. I was on the phone with Ron Graham for performance analyses. I had material on polynomial and pseudo-polynomial algorithms from Gene. Alex was there for the overview and the connecting text. And I decided to do a complete overhaul of the classification system because the system we had in our thesis didn't work. And well, the story you may refer to is that at one point I needed Alex's advice. And Alex, I just stormed out of my room and into his, which was not very tactful because Alex at that time was in need of a new female relationship, and he was working on that. So he was working on that, I was working on the survey, right? I also recall that later in a train ride from Brussels to Amsterdam, we were fighting for 2 hours on whether you should have jobs J and machines I or jobs I and machines J, to the utter amazement of our fellow passengers. But you know, I'm the managing author, and as managing author, you have the final word anyhow. So that is we presented our service at this NATO Advanced Summer Institute in Vancouver in August 77. Yeah.
Fantastic. You know, this couple of stories are just amazing. Thanks a lot for sharing them. And I want to ask a question which is related to the survey probably. So could you tell the story behind the famous 3-field notation in scheduling? Well,
that's not... Conway Maxwell Miller had this 4-field notation. For the job shop was NMG CMAX. Jobs, machines, the structure, the G for job shop and the objective. And then we decided that for scheduling you always have N jobs. So you can delete that. You can take it beyond brackets. And we decided to put the machine environment up front. And I decided to have a J for jobs and for job shop and not a G. And so on and so on. So we completely forgot the Conway Maxwell Miller stuff, and we went for this 3-field notation: machine environment, job characteristics, and objective. And that has been generalized in many, many, many directions. And if I read this, then my feeling is that, well, when we did the Graham survey or later papers, we would not really generalize the notation, but handle the special cases just in the text. At one point, you don't memorize it anymore.
Sure.
Anyhow, it is still being used, and it is the first organizing principle, and complexity is the second organizing principle, and it works. It works. There's just one disadvantage, that this classification scheme generates many problems that would not exist otherwise, right?
Yes.
And then you can ask the question, is it worth working on them? On the other hand, scheduling is a meeting ground of algorithms, complexity, optimization, stochastic processes, everything. And it's very fertile and fruitful, so that's the plus.
Yeah. We usually refer to Graham et al., which is the survey from 1979. And there is also this work of yours in the early 90s that is also addressing this, right?
Yeah, well, the Graham is the first survey, 79. And that has over 8,000 citations, I think, because it establishes the architecture of deterministic machine scheduling. We made the revision for the proceedings of the Durham Super School in 81. But for the handbooks on OR and Management Science, Volume 4, we completely rewrote the survey, which was published in 93. And then Ron Graham didn't want to be a co-author anymore. David Shmoys joined us, and that is much more complete. Yeah. And then we want to turn that into a book which never ever worked out.
Yeah. So can we say that you were the father of the three-field notation in scheduling?
I think that Graham, Waller, Alexander, and myself, we are the father of the three-field notation in scheduling. I think that when you look really behind the door of the study, I did most of the nitty-gritty work because that had to be done, and I'm the classifier among the four of us.
Right. So the four of you worked on that?
Yeah.
You were the person that led the way and organized things and put all together. Yeah,
but it would never have worked without the creativity of Gene and his expository talents, or the overview and the sense of purpose of Alex. And you know, Ron Graham was the person who invented performance analysis of approximation algorithms, which was an enormously important addition to what we were doing before then, right?
Right, yeah. And talking about that, what do you think of the research on approximation algorithms in scheduling?
Well, I think that you get great insights if you look at the analysis of list scheduling versus LPT. Then that tells you that if you pack a suitcase, you rather put in the big items first. And there's a mathematical justification for that. And that is important. And many approximation algorithms give beautiful insights and results. At the same time, some of them are also designed to be analyzable rather than to be practical. For example, there is this tiny microscopic improvement of Nicos' algorithm, 3/2 algorithm for the TSP, which gives you 3/2 minus something very small. And you don't want that. What you do want is a simple method giving 4/3, right?
Uh-huh.
And in that way, it is also useful to analyze approximation algorithms that are being designed to be used, like local search and meta-heuristics, which is hard because of all the preconditioning that goes on in all those successive steps. But that's an area which I think is very important. I had a few PhD theses in the 90s focusing on that, performance analysis of local search. Why does Lynn Currigan as well as it does? But it's hard. So I think it's a good area, but it can be expanded. Yes, certainly.
Yeah. We cannot talk about the 1970s without mentioning the legendary Dutch national team, also known as the Clockwork Orange. What are your memories from that team led by Johan Cruyff?
You know, when I was still a student and in my early years of my PhD research with my future brother-in-law, who was a friend of mine, we visited many of the matches of Ajax. And that was the time that they won 3 European Cups with this forward of Cruyff, Keizer, and Swart. By the way, Swart is still alive. The other 2 died, and that was what they called the total soccer, where all players could substitute for each other. And that was the basis of the Dutch team that lost the finals against Germany in '74, which was extremely frustrating because they were playing the best soccer, but well, the Germans always walk away with the cup, and that was very frustrating. And that when they lost the finals against Argentina, when Cruyff was not allowed by his wife to be part of the team, that was kind of acceptable. And when they lost the finals against Spain, that was understandable, because that was not a beautiful match to watch. So, what can you say?
At least you won the Euro in 1988.
Okay, there's a story there. Yeah, that I was at the Euro Summer Institute in the south of Holland. I was teaching there, but in the weekend, I had to give a class in Ankara at a meeting, and that's where in this villa in Ankara, I saw the finals. Yeah, and that was very nice. '88.
Yeah.
I forgot, was it against the Soviet Union?
Could have been, and I know that Van Basten and I think Gullit, they scored the goals.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So after all the excitement from the 70s, you started the next decade getting a divorce.
Yeah, that was more the end of the previous decade and the start of the new one. I got married in '73, and that was ill-advised, and that was an ill fit. But the good thing that the 2 of us produced a beautiful daughter, Catherine, and things didn't work out well. And I was focusing on my daughter and on my research, and my wife, my future ex, she was getting depressed and isolated. So in 1980 we decided to finish that, and that was better for all 3 of us, I think.
Mm-hmm. And when did you meet your current wife?
Well, that was at this meeting at this Euro Summer Institute in '88 in the south of Holland. That was an annual meeting of Euro, the European Association of Our Societies. There were 5 Dutch professors on production planning, so Alex and me and Ton de Kok and Jacob Wijngaard and so on. About 25 students, and each of us got 5 students assigned, 4 or 5. And Karen Aardal from Sweden, she was one of the 5 assigned to me. She wrote a paper on Bendel's decomposition, and that was a very good paper. I had it reviewed for a special issue later of eJOR, and I got rave reviewed. And I never told her, not even after we got married, who the referees were. So in the middle of that meeting, I was visiting Ankara, and at this meeting she came to me, and in a timid voice she had, "Can I do a PhD with you at CWI?" And I said, "No, you can't. You cannot, because I'm going to leave CWI. I will spend the fall of '88 at MIT, and in '89 I'll move to Eindhoven. I'm winding down my group. And by the way, given what you were doing, you don't want to do a PhD with me, but with Laurent Voulzy at COR in Louvain-la-Neuve in Belgium." So she applied for a grant, and she got it, and she wrote a PhD with Laurent Voulzy. So that was good advice. There's a story there. There was in '91, after 3 years, there was the pre-défense, which is really a serious session. There's a candidate, and at one side of the table there is the candidate, and at my side there are 5 professors rostering the candidate, right, and drilling the candidate. And I had my questions. I had my next question, and then Lauren said, "Do you have another question, Jan Karel?" I didn't have any other questions, so I said, "Well, Karen, for solving those problems of yours, did you consider using Minto, which was the mixed integer optimizer of Savelsbergh and Nemhauser?" And Savelsbergh was my student. And then she looked at me and she said, "Minto, do you have financial interest in Minto or what?" And then Lawrence was burying his head in his hands, and he thought he's going to kill her. And I said something like, Miss Aardal, we are asking the questions. You are here to respond to them, so please go ahead. So in 91, she, after a year in England, she came to Erasmus University in Rotterdam. In 93, we got married. Yes, and we're still married.
Yes. Yeah, so you have recently completed 30 years of...
Yes, we did.
That's very nice. You also have a nice story involving Eva Tardos and in an interesting complexity result, right?
Yeah, well, and in Berkeley 88, I was visiting Eva and David. They were together, and I'm not sure if they had gotten married, but that doesn't matter. We were staying with Jean then, and Eva and David they were studying minimizing makespan on unrelated parallel machines, RCMax, and Eva and David had a two approximation algorithm there, which was quite a feat. And Eva said, you cannot get a polynomial time approximation algorithm with a guarantee less than 4/3. And I said, no, that's trivial, because achieving a deadline of 3 is hard. And if you would have an approximation algorithm that with a guarantee less than 4/3, it can never give you 4 if 3 is possible. So it would solve the 3 problem, and that's hard. So you can't get within 4/3. And then Eva said, well, the open problem is meeting a deadline of 2 also hard. Meeting a deadline of 1 is trivial. And she said, we can't do that, because then you get a stronger result. Then you get an impossibility result for you can't get within 3/2. So in the plain back, I found a pretty simple reduction showing that meeting a deadline of 2 is hard. And it was simple because I really cannot do complex reductions. This was simple. So when I got back home in Amsterdam, I got on the phone. I called David. I got his dad on the phone. And I said, Mr. Shmoys, please tell David 2 is hard. So thank you.
Wow.
I will do, he said. And then David called me. And I explained everything to him, and I said, you can put this in your paper and give me an acknowledgement, because this proof is 1 page. And then they made me a co-author. It's their paper, and I contributed this proof, and that is still, I think the impossibility result still stands. There's still this gap between 3/2.5. Yeah.
Yeah, another great story. Why did you move to Eindhoven in 1989?
Oh, well, I knew CWI inside out. I had been everything there from student assistant up to department head, and I needed to move ahead. I had part-time professorships in economics departments at the Erasmus also, most lately. But I had decided that I don't fit in an economics department. I need math and computer science people around me. That's just my fault. And I knew that Jacques Benders of Benders Decomposition would retire in July 89. So in early 88, I called a colleague of his in Eindhoven. I said, I'm here and I'm going to leave Erasmus and I'm going to leave CWI. And how about me moving to Eindhoven? And he said, well, that can be arranged. We'll do our best. And that worked out. In Erasmus, they said Eindhoven is a provincial place. It's a farmers' university. Why do you do that? But for me, the sun was shining in Eindhoven, and I had a very good time there, and that was the right decision. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had the chance to visit Eindhoven thanks to Tom van Ossel in 2022. I had a great time at TUE. It's a fantastic university. And it's interesting to know that you took the position of Benders, the famous one. Yeah. Dijkstra was a professor there as well, right? Did you meet him?
Yeah. Well, Dijkstra was previously at the Mass Center, but he had left to Eindhoven before I got into the Mass Center. And when I got into Eindhoven, he had left to Texas. So, and when I got to Atlanta later, he had retired and was living in Holland again. So in that sense, I never met him. I met him a few times on PhD committees in Eindhoven. And that's one thing, Dijkstra was a genius. If you read his 58 paper on shortest paths and spanning trees, then the exposition of the algorithm is at the same time a correctness proof. Dijkstra was the embodiment of combining efficiency and correctness. And he was visionary in that respect. He was not an easy person. When he won the Turing Award, and he was the only Dutch person having won the Nobel Prize for Computer Science, and he went to his dean to tell him, his dean said, you computer science people give each other an awful amount of awards. Isn't that true? So then that was not nice, and then he left. And later I was present at the reception in Eindhoven, and he walked up to a colleague of mine, and he shook his hand and he said, my name is Dijkstra. You have probably heard my name. And my colleague said, Dijkstra. No, I have never heard his name. and Dijkstra didn't like that. Well, but he was a very special person. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, what an interesting life you had in those years. I mean, you just cited so many legends from our field. It's just mind-boggling to imagine having the opportunity not only to contribute to the field, but also to witness its development and also a lot of things behind the scenes during that time. And you mentioned Martin Savelsbergh, and recently I had the chance to interview him. So he was your PhD student, wasn't he?
Yeah. I got a grant that was the first grant at CWI of the Dutch Technology Foundation, where you had to do scientific research for a useful problem with a existing user. So we developed a system called CAR, computer-aided routing, which was a decision support system for a routing company, combining theory and practice. And Martin was perfect for this because Martin knows practice. He even joined the truck drivers early in the morning. He's a theoretician. He knows his stuff. He's very purpose-oriented, and he did a great job. And I tried to keep him in Eindhoven, but it didn't work out. He moved on to Atlanta. He's a great scientist, and he's a great friend. Yeah, it's very good that you interviewed him.
He mentioned during his interview that he shared the lab with the person who created Python. Do you also have the chance to interact with the inventor of Python?
That was Guido van Rossum. He was a programmer at CWI, and since he didn't publish papers, he didn't get tenure. But he designed Python, and Python really, if you look at the history of CWI, Python goes back to Algol 60. Algol 60 led to Algol 68, which was too complex, and then they made more practical variants like the ABC language, a language called B, and all those design principles you find back in Python. And Guido van Rossum, of course, he moved on, he went to Google and stuff. I met him once. I don't know him really well.
Okay. I know you have an interesting story with Wenci Yu. Is that right?
Yeah, he's another PhD student. Karel and I met him in Shanghai, where he was our host when we were visiting China in 94. He was a senior person. He was much older than I am, but he decided to visit Eindhoven for a year, and with a background in applied analysis and numerical computing, he solved a pretty hard scheduling problem. He proved it to be NP-hard, and it was a very complex reduction. And in that year, he wrote a thesis, and he defended it under my supervision, right? But he did the work on his own. In the same month that his son got a PhD with George Danzig in Stanford. And that was, I have never had a person with so much energy and stamina while his age was at least twice of that of the average PhD student. Yeah.
Yeah, but sadly, he
later,
right?
Back in Shanghai, he noted that his creative capabilities were decreasing, which is no big wonder if you're getting older, but he committed suicide because of that, which was very sad. Mm-hmm. He was a good person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really, really sad. So in 2002, you went to Georgia Tech for a brief period before returning to Amsterdam in the next year. How did that happen, and why didn't you stay longer?
Okay, well, I was dean in Eindhoven, and that was all going well. And I was running the computer science, math and computer science faculty. My wife was an associate professor in Utrecht, and she was not happy in her job. And then they asked me to apply to become school chair at ISYE in Atlanta, at Georgia Tech. However, the first interview went very well. The second interview, I just didn't have my day, and well, it didn't work out. I didn't get a job, but then we still decided to move to Atlanta, and we had a great time there. It was a very busy year getting started. Our son was born there. He still has an American passport, so he can become president one day. But on the other hand, for Karen had a great time professionally, but I was still teaching and doing the work while I wanted to be in charge of the school, which didn't work out. And then I was offered the directorship of CWI in Amsterdam, and that was a pretty hard choice. CWI, we went back to Amsterdam. I became director. Karen got a part-time job, and for me that was splendid. For her that was a big sacrifice. I think that eventually it turned out good for the entire family. She built a very nice group in Delft, and I think that Holland is a better place than the US at this point. But that was a hard decision. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Jan Karel, I can see that you like to manage things. So from the 80s onward, you got involved in several administrative roles, including prestigious ones at the national level. Could you comment about them?
Yeah, in the 80s, I was really living on my own, mostly, sometimes with my daughter. I really became more and more involved in organizational and editorial work, which started to dominate my research. And as I've said, this kind of role suited me well. Research was done by students, by Martin Savelsbergh and other people. One example is in 87 we established a national network in the math of OR, which still exists and provides PhD and master courses at the national level. I mean, our country is small enough that you can travel from everywhere to Utrecht and get back home the same day. I remember that I proposed this to a complete meeting of all professors, and all got long faces. You were taking away our local power. And then the old Cohen of the single server queue, he was in favor, and he walked to me, tapped my shoulder, and he said, "Jan Karel, those things need their time, right?" Uh-huh. I became president of the Dutch Math Society. We revamped its journal from really something that looked pretty bad to what I think is now the most beautiful science journal in Holland, and it still exists. And we started the proceedings to turn the society into the Royal Dutch Math Society, which worked out well.
Have you used your typography skills there?
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. That if you get starting editorial work and you design a journal, I was sitting down with a graphic designer, and we were discussing the typeface, and she was happy to see someone in math that knew the difference between the Bodoni and the Baskerville and the Garamond, right? Yes, mm-hmm. Yes. And I became dean in Eindhoven. Internationally, I became first executive committee chair and then chair of the Mathematical Programming Society, now the Mathematical Optimization Society. We organized a symposium in 91, which, by the way, is likely to return to Holland in 2027, we hope. And I became editorially involved with many journals, a whole list. I became editor-in-chief of Math of OR, Operations Research Letters, which is nice because you work with the very best people when you succeed in getting them on board. And I edited the Traveling Salesman with Gene and Alex and David Shmoys. We edited the Traveling Salesman book. We had for the symposium in Amsterdam, we had this nice book on history of mathematical programming. Later, local search and combinatorial optimization. all kind of nice editorial things where indeed also book design and graphic design kind of interact with contents, with mathematics. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of contributions, and you certainly have done a vast editorial work, from journals to books. Is there anything that you would like to share regarding these experiences?
Well, for editing a journal, you need an attitude which I would call relaxed authority. You are in charge, but don't show it too much. And you should also be able to make decisions irrespective of personal relations. I mean, you should be able to tell Egon Ballas, sorry, Egon, we are good friends, but I'm not going to publish this paper. And I once told someone that we can only remain friends when I kick you from the board, right? And you have to be able to do that in a kind way. Once I told an author, there was this author who had a very sharp knife, and for several journals I was handling 3 papers on related topics, and I wrote him, I reject all 3 of them, but I commit myself to publishing a combined paper in the best journal, Method of Our. And he was grinding his teeth, but he went along. And oh yeah, if you put a book together, never wait for the last chapter, because that's going to do forever. When you have the next to last one, go ahead.
That's a very good piece of advice, and also, again, very nice stories. I have a quick anecdote of my own. I think in 2010 or something, I've submitted a paper to Oral Letters. That was one of the papers for my PhD thesis. And at that time, Oral Letters did not have an online submission system. So I had to submit it by email. And of course, I had to send it to you, directly to you. And you managed that paper that ended up being accepted. So we have exchanged emails at that time. The paper went on to be the top most 25 cited papers in the next 3 to 5 years or so. It was interesting that you have communicated before, but of course you don't remember that. It's been quite a while. So I would like you to comment on one of the books that you have edited, and you already mentioned it, The History of Mathematical Programming, a collection of personal reminiscences. Several important names from our field had contributed to that book, including, for example, George Dantzig.
Yeah, that was an idea of Lex Schrijver to put together a book on the history of the field for the Amsterdam Symposium. It once has been said that every university needs at least 2 disciplines, history and math. Math as the language for modeling and computing, and history for providing the context. So that is why you often see this combination of math and history. And all the other topics you choose for university are just local preferences. So we put together this book, and we wanted a contribution by Jack Edmonds, but we were not sure that Jack would actually write it down himself. So we decided to interview him. And we asked George Nemhauser to interview him at an Oberwolfach meeting where I was the technical engineer. And we taped all of this. It was a tape recorder, and it took 1.5 hours. And the week after that, Bert Geerheids made the TypeScript. He typed everything out. And that is version 1. And then Lex Schrijver and Bert kind of rearranged all the material to make it into a nice readable account. That is version 2. And the version that we published is version 3, where we deleted most of the names of the people he mentioned. So rather than actual names, you see ghosts that exist in Jack Edmonds' mind, rather than existing people, without mentioning them. And that is the version there. I still have the other 2 versions, but I won't make them public.
Come on. Yeah, it's incredible. I like very much the chapter written by George Dantzig. It tells the story of the terms, right, in our field and all that. So I find it very nice. You mentioned like Alexander Schrijver. How was the experience of working with such a brilliant scholar?
Well, he is a very exceptional person. The amount of work he is able to do is amazing. He was planning to write his book on combinatorial optimization, but then the first 2 chapters on LP turned into his book on linear and integral programming. And the good and exceptional thing about it is not written from an OR point of view. It is a math book. And then he had this 3-volume book on combinatorial optimization. I could, this amount of dedication, I could never do this. But he's a peculiar person. I remember that this history book, I was doing the desk editing together with Gerard Kindervater, a PhD student, using Tirov, a predecessor of TeX and LaTeX. And we were sitting there in the terminal room. And you know that in a book, you don't want to have the first line of a paragraph at the bottom of a page or the last line of a paragraph at the top of a page. And what do? You change the text a bit. You delete some needless words. Uh-huh. And we were happily doing this. And then I saw Lex entering the terminal room. I said, Gerard, take it easy. And Lex looked over our shoulder and he said, I assume you are not changing the text. I hope. No, Lex, no way, no. But when he retired and had to give a speech, I told him that we actually did. Yeah, he's an exceptional person. He's a Spinoza winner, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the other Alexander? At some point, he took off.
He was rector. He was rector of Erasmus at that point, and he was supporting, but he was extremely busy. He was busy in fundraising, and he was busy in the publicity, the general publicity around the meeting. So he was very useful. Yeah.
So did you miss collaborating with him after he stopped, doing research and all that?
At one point you go your own way, and we had different personalities and different, that was to be predicted, different paths in life. He was to go to leave math, that was clear, and I was to become an organizer within math, that was also clear. So that was to be expected, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Jan Karel, what have you been doing after retirement?
That if I look back on it, I observed that I started a second life in educational and science policy. Just before I retired, there was a big public debate in Holland between the best way to teach elementary arithmetic in primary schools. And I was very glad that I was not involved. I mean, CWI is at the other end of the knowledge chain. But then Alexander, who was president of the Social Economic Council and the president of the Royal Academy, said, Jan Karel, you are going to solve this debate and see who is right in this fight. So I had to chair this committee of the Royal Academy, and we found out that both camps were equally right and equally wrong. They were supporting different ways to teach math, but the reason that the arithmetic capabilities of small kids went down was that the teacher himself couldn't do it anymore because of the erosion of the teacher academy. And that report of the Royal Academy did have a real practical impact in the sense that first, the fight was settled, and second, the teacher academies got redesigned. And then, people found out that I could chair difficult committees. So there was another committee on digital literacy in secondary education. There was in view of the ongoing use and spread of the mathematical sciences across all disciplines, a plan to write a Delta plan for Dutch mathematics to get additional funding, which worked out pretty well. And I was asked to chair the Dutch Spinoza committee. Spinoza is our main prize in science, and also the practical equivalent, the Stevin committee. And in those committees, you have 12 foreign people around the table, and they're usually big egos. And I always start by saying, I want two things of you. You have to be critical and constructive. Critical, you say exactly what you think. Constructive, you listen to each other and are willing to change your opinion. And when you say that, there's no real problem anymore. So that I have been busy with all those things, and that has been a good period, my retirement so far. Yes.
That's remarkable. I mean, it feels that you haven't even retired.
To some extent. Well, when you get 75, I'm 76 right now, the number of things you get asked for, it diminishes. Yes.
Your brother, one of your brothers, won the Spinoza Award, right?
Yeah, but that was way back in the 90s. Yeah, yeah.
Jan Karel, do you have any regrets?
Well, my main regret is I mean, you always make mistakes, and you cannot. I mean, every person is a combination of pluses and minuses, and if you start reliving your life, you would say, now I'm going to do everything better, but that never works out because you make mistakes. I think my main regret is that we never finished our book. We wanted to write this book on scaling, but it turns out that when you have more authors, at one point we had Laura, Rinnooy Kan, Shmoys, and me, you also have more complexity and more subsets of people with different diverging opinions, and the project ownership is less clear. So it didn't work out. Gene was the driving force and the main expositor, but he was distracted by new problems he wanted to think about. He got sick. He died in '94. Alex was eventually called to higher offices and duties and responsibilities, and I, you know, for me the scope of a complete book is kind of contradicting my perfectionism and micromanagement. I can do an 80-page survey, but a big book turns out to be kind of beyond, and I also got distracted by organizational editorial work by my family. But during the COVID pandemic, David Shmoys and I succeeded in compiling the 2/3 of the book that exists and putting it on a website where everyone can use this material for teaching purposes. elementsofscaling.nl, and it's available. So that's my main regret, and I guess that in retrospect I should have locked myself up for half a year with Gene Lawler in Oberwolfachasau and then written it, but that is an insight afterwards.
Yeah, it's completely understandable. At some point, one becomes overwhelmed when managing or organizing a book, and managing a team of collaborators, and there's sort of this tailing off, so it never converges, tailing off effect. Yeah. So yeah. And what are your plans for the future?
I honestly never planned my life, and I'm still busy enough with the things that come my way. I mean, now your invitation came my way, and that takes a couple of days. And Michael Pinedo asked me to comment on the 6th edition of his book because he wants to make a 7th edition, and that will take me a couple of weeks. And then they have the symposium in 2027 where I'm involved in the fundraising, and I never have made plans, but my experience is that people will ask you for the things that you're good at, and they won't ask you for the other things. And I'm still very much, as long as my brains and my body are okay, I'll continue with the things that get on my desk.
All right. Jan Karel, thank you so much for your time. I'm super grateful. I mean, listening to dozens of stories, some wonderful anecdotes. It was just a treat, and thank you so much.
Thank you for this opportunity. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I know you like to travel. So in case you're considering visiting South America, Brazil, I don't have to tell that you can always send me an email, and maybe we can try to find a way to meet.
Yes, and you may visit Holland too. Right.
Okay. Thanks a lot once again, and stay healthy. And I hope that you have many more productive years ahead of you.
Thank you so much. Okay.
So bye. Ciao.
Bye.